Welcome back to another episode of eLEXYfy, the Place for Fashion podcast. On this week's episode, we are speaking with Ben Mead, the managing director at Hohenstein Institute, which is OEKO TEX's US-based institute. So Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on. So I guess to get started, could you tell us a little bit about how OEKO TEX got started and the primary motivations kind of behind starting this establishment?
So, I mean, that's always where we start with the customers, the companies that we're trying to work with as well. And some of them are really familiar with OEKO TEX because it's been around since 1992. But it really started because of a need from the European textile industry. So they were really looking for a solution to try and communicate to customers, retail customers, that a textile was made using chemicals, but that it was safe. And the real reason for that was because there was some new legislation coming in place in Europe. And so for the first time, I think the average customer was starting to learn and understand that, okay, all these products had to be made with chemicals, and some of them are okay and some of them could be dangerous. And how do I know the difference? And so the solution was this OEKO TEX association, which really came together from two different laboratories. So Hohenstein, the company that I work for, was one of those first two involved in that and had the technical expertise in testing textiles and knowing what kind of chemicals could be in there. And so the challenge with all of that was, how do you communicate something so technical to a consumer who's trying to make a decision? And that was the sort of the solution, was that this label that says, hey, if you see this label on the product, it means that it's been tested for harmful substances. It's safe. You don't have to worry about digging into all the details. Because the other thing that was happening at the time was that textile manufacturing, both in Europe and in the US, actually were moving other places. So there were like strong textile industries in both places. And because of this desire to have usually lower labor costs, that production was moving farther and further away. And so there was more and more skepticism from the consumers that, okay, I don't know where the product is being made. How can I know that it's being safe or it's being made in a safe way? And again, that's what drove that demand for the certification, particularly in Europe. And then it's grown over time into being pretty visible and popular in the US as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think that a lot of us hopefully just assume that our textiles, the clothes we wear, the bed that we sleep in is hopefully not harming us in terms of chemicals, but in reality it can be. So I think that there was a market for that and you guys saw that and, filled that market. So OEKO TEX offers several certifications like the Standard 100, the Made in Green, and STEP. Can you explain the differences between these certifications?
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned briefly, so OEKO TEX's start was really with that certification for protecting people from dangerous chemicals, or knowing if dangerous chemicals were present in the finished product. And that's what we call the Standard 100. So a lot of times people associate the Standard 100 and OEKO TEX as the exact same thing, but really under OEKO TEX's portfolio, there's a whole series of different standards and they mean different things. Standard 100 for sure is the largest, most recognized, thousands of brand manufacturers, material manufacturers all using it to make sure that people up their supply chain, and then eventually customers, retail customers buying anything from t-shirts to home textiles, have that ability to see it. So that one really means we restrict a list of up to 1,000 or more than 1,000 now chemicals that could be hazardous for one reason or another. And we test the products to make sure that they're not there and they're not present in those textiles, so that the customer has the assurance that it's safe and they can wear it and they don't have to worry about it. So that's the main background, coming from that textile expertise, that chemical expertise. And what we've seen is, just like Standard 100 came from a real clear demand from the consumer and from the industry, we've seen a bigger shift here, not just about product safety, while that's still important, but we're also seeing a lot of people really interested in knowing about the sustainability attributes. And of course, sustainability means something different to a lot of different people, but where our expertise lies is, again, in the supply chain. What are the facilities that are making these products? Because they're not made in one single facility. They're made in multiple facilities in different places a lot of times. And so evaluating those facilities and making sure that they're using chemicals in the right way, that they have a management system around how do we know what's in the inventory? How do we know how to use it? How do we protect the workers that are using those chemicals? And then how do we understand what are the risks if a chemical is applied to a textile and it doesn't all stay in the textile? It's going to end up someplace else, right? It's going to either end up in the air, it's going to end up in the water, leaving the facility. So there's a lot of concern around that from the environmental performance. And then certainly there's a lot of interest in measuring performance from an environmental standpoint as well, meaning how much water does it take to produce these textiles? How much energy does it take to produce these textiles? And starting to measure that and understand at a factory level, at a facility level, what are those impacts and how are we doing compared to somebody else in a similar country or in a similar type of production. But then there's other areas that people are also concerned about, for sure, worker safety, social compliance. So meaning that the employees of the company making it are being treated fairly, that they have fair wages, that they have fair working hours, that generally their working conditions are good. And so that's something that's also evaluated through STEP. And then all that comes together because it's hard to communicate all of that in one thing to a consumer. And so the solution from OEKO TEX is to put this made in green label. And so the made in green label is, I would say, the pinnacle label from OEKO TEX at the moment that goes on the product. It tells the consumer directly, this product's safe, it's been tested for harmful substances, but the supply chain that it was made in has also been evaluated from its sustainability practices. So that means not just that finished goods factory where typically the different materials from different sources come together and are sewn together, cut and sewn together, but also the facilities where the wet processing happens. So the fabric that's coming into the t-shirt is a lot of times dyed and finished in a different location, potentially in a different country. And so that measurement is happening, or that evaluation of those facilities is coming together as well. And you start to create that traceability of the product. And so that's becoming really important to customers as well.
Yeah, and I feel like as a consumer, a lot of consumers nowadays are pushing for this transparency aspect in terms of like where are clothes coming from, where are sheets coming from. And oftentimes the traceability is not easy to find. Sometimes even the brands don't know. So this is super, super great to see that we're working on becoming more transparent in our industry. So you mentioned it a little bit with STEP, but you guys have an impact calendar for STEP and it measures the carbon emissions and water usage. How does that work? How does the impact calculator work?
Yeah, when we do that STEP certification at a facility, that company answers a whole bunch of questions about themselves. How many employees work there? What types of products they're making? What are the processes that are involved? All the way down to what are their management systems. And part of that is how much production do they make? How much water do they use? How much energy do they use? And of course, they're providing that in a self-assessment and they're backing it up with information from the municipality where they're buying the water or the energy provider that's giving that to them. And so they provide that information, they provide the documentation around it, and ultimately somebody from OEKO TEX goes and visits the facility, confirms a lot of things, but among that is this impact usage. And the calculator is essentially a way for those companies to break down where their impacts are going and start to look at it on a per facility basis, per production unit basis, not only to see where they are and, like we talked about, sort of benchmark themselves against other similar companies, but also to start to either set goals in place in terms of improvement or model changes that they might be thinking to make. So if we think about an easy one, okay, a facility is producing tons and tons of products and they decide, okay, across this whole facility, we're going to change the way we run our air conditioning, or we're going to change the way that our lighting system, our power system works, or we're going to bring in some sort of renewable energy to that. All of that can affect those impacts, and they have a way to take that data and their assumptions and model that in the future before they make that investment. So we hear a lot about life cycle assessment, or LCA, and that's a pretty complex process. Most of the time, companies are hiring some outside professional to do that, and it can be very expensive. So this is a way for those companies, while they're not doing a full LCA, to really look at some of the same things based on the same principles of LCA, and again, model what they're doing and see, okay, how are they performing? Which direction are they heading? And are they making some of the right decisions?
That's so interesting. When you want to get an OEKO certification, how does that process start? Where can you go to get the certification?
So OEKO TEX is the standards body. They create the rules for these different standards, and then there's a network of different institutes or labs that we would call them here in the U.S. And they're the ones that are really have the on the ground expertise in textile manufacturing and chemical testing and those sort of things. So the institutes are the ones that come and really do the assessments or help the companies through the process. And like you mentioned in the beginning, I work for Hohenstein. We're based here in the US, and our team is really responsible for supporting the US companies that want to do that. So if it's a manufacturer and they're just found out about OEKO TEX because they listened today, they would contact us. Or if they're a brand and they know, okay, OEKO TEX exists, we've heard of it. Now we have some corporate initiatives and we're trying to figure out how to work that in and sort of leverage existing things rather than recreating all the requirements ourselves. They're reaching out to us as well. We're helping them understand, okay, you've got suppliers in this country. Let's start by asking them, have they already gone through standard 100 certification, or are they thinking about step certification? And that's going to help to map their process. But ultimately, the institutes, so Hohenstein again in the US is responsible for helping to do that. And then other institutes in other countries help those companies through, understand the requirements, understand what they need to do.
Got it. That's so interesting. Wow. So we're talking about OEKO TEX and how great it is. But if you don't get an OEKO TEX certification and your fiber or whatever is in fact chemical ridden, how do harmful substances in textile fibers affect human health and the environment? Because I feel like that's something that we don't hear about all the time, is like how, again, our socks or our bed sheets are affecting us.
I think particularly in the US, up until recently, I think that was the general assumption, right? That we're in the US, there must be a lot of laws protecting us. Why should I worry about that? I should worry about something more important. In reality, like I mentioned, the OEKO TEX certification started in Europe because there's a lot more legislation there. So the rules of the OEKO TEX standards are based on global rules because the rules in the US are really not that strong when it comes to all consumer products, but particularly textile. So if you're producing a kid's product or a baby's product, then sure, there are some requirements that you have to meet. But until recent years, when some of the states have started taking on their own set of requirements around disclosure of chemicals or restrictions and enforcements around chemicals, there haven't been that many in place. We start to hear a little bit more about some specific named chemicals like BPA and PFAS and some of those other fluorinated, we've heard about fluorinated chemicals in that PFAS group for a long time. All of those have different hazards. And so I think that's getting back to what your real question was there. It's like, why do we care about these chemicals in here? What could they do to me? And so some of them that are on this list are there because they cause real acute hazards or acute injuries. So they cause skin irritations, they cause rashes, those sort of things that are very visible to us. But many of them are on there because of things that we can't see. And the risk of them is more based on that repeated long-term exposure to them. So like you mentioned, I've got chemicals in my t-shirt, I've got chemicals in my sheets, I've got chemicals in my car. I'm exposed to these all the time. And so it might not just be those one little exposures. And so the goal from OEKO TEX and from the standard 100 is to keep those exposures as minimal as possible, because what's happening long term is the risk that some of those chemicals that are restricted could cause cancer, or
Mhm.
they could affect our hormone systems in our body, or they could even, as we talked about some of the facility level stuff, they could have aquatic toxicity issues. So if they're released from the facility, they could be causing harm in the environment where they're being produced, or if they make their way through the wastewater systems, then they're persistent. So they don't break down, they remain there forever and ever. And as global production continues, we just have higher and higher levels of them present. And so that's OEKO TEX's sort of goal then in helping companies to be responsible in that production process.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do in terms of like, hey guys, did you actually know that your shirt had a lot of chemicals in it and it's gonna have a really big impact on you? I feel like in the kind of like sustainable. I hate that word because you mentioned earlier, it means so much to different people, but it's also such a broad term that it can be misdefined in multiple different ways. In the sustainable world or whatever, I feel like you have to make the story personal. I'm talking about the planet and animals and the people who are making our clothes, but sometimes people don't necessarily care about those things as much as you wish they would. So I feel like making the story personal, saying that, hey, this is actually affecting you, can really help to open people's eyes. And so I'm glad that we could touch on that a little bit. So as consumers hopefully become more environmentally conscious, how does the OEKO-TEX certification help them to make more informed choices?
I mean, the biggest thing that we know is that consumers have a lot of information coming at them, right? So how do you process all that information? Like you said, okay, it isn't something that they've been prioritizing. It's not something that everybody has a degree in chemistry, so that it's really coming right down to what they're living every single day. So for one, having the label on the product makes it really simple for them to see, okay, here's something different. Even if they don't have any idea what that label means the first time they see it,
Mhm.
it triggers them to go and say, okay, I want to learn more about this because I don't know what OEKO TEX Standard 100 means today, but I know I can go and look up on the website then and see, okay, this is about testing for harmful substances. And now I'm saying, okay, that's important to me, like you just said, that's important to me personally. So now I want to go and look for those labels the next time because it makes it very quick and easy for them to make a decision or to compare two similar products. One has it, one doesn't. It doesn't necessarily mean that the product without the label is harmful. What it
Mhm.
means is the product without the label is an unknown. I don't know what care was taken with that. I don't know if that brand that I'm buying from has a program internally where they're trying to manage chemicals. A lot of companies do, but a lot of companies that have those programs are still then using the standard 100 within their supply chain to reduce their own workload, but also make it more visible to the end consumer.
Mhm.
Uh, and then on the made in green side of things, where we talked before, that's a whole nother level of how do you make a decision because the products that are carrying that made in green label are not only carrying that claim that the product has been tested for harmful substances and we can trust that it's safe for us, but it's also giving you this huge library of information about how the product was made and where the product was made. And you start to connect that traceability element to it, not only the transparency element of it as well, because that traceability comes through the fact that, okay, like we mentioned before, this shirt is made with fabrics coming from one location, stitching threads, buttons, labels, some other components that are in there as well that are coming from a lot of different places. And so knowing and getting beyond just what are the local labeling requirements. If I buy a textile, I can see it says it's made in whatever country. That tells me where where the product was cut and sewn together, but it doesn't tell me anything about where those raw materials came from. So enabling that and getting consumers to understand that information can be available is, I think, a big thing because like you started at the beginning saying not every brand knows where their materials are coming from or how the product is made. And that's still so true today that there are a lot of people in the supply chain that are important in getting a product to market. And it's very hard as a brand to be able to make meaningful change if you don't know where those products are being made.
Completely. I was doing laundry yesterday, as one does, and I was in fact washing my bed sheets, and I looked and I ever since learning about the OEKO-TEX certification, I've been seeing it pop up everywhere. And I saw it on my bed and I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know that this is OEKO-TEX certified. I'm like so happy to find this out now. And I just keep seeing it pop up in random things on my clothes, on this, on that. And I feel like as a consumer, like you said, it's like we're bombarded with all this information. It's not necessarily just on the consumer to shop sustainably. Like, yes, make more sustainable, mindful choices and kind of change some of your habits when it comes to certain things. But it should also be on the legislation, the brands, this and that. Um, so I feel like as a consumer, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of information that you're like getting thrown at you all the time. And so the OEKO-TEX certification really just takes that away. Once you learn what it is, if you see it on something, you're like, oh, this has been tested. I don't have to worry now. So I feel like it's just such a sigh of relief to see that that certification. And so the OEKO certification is a certification. It's not a product. Obviously, there are products that are certified. But is that ever something that you guys want to have in the future? Is like a brand or something that's like, this is all OEKO TEX certified?
I don't really think that's going to be something that OEKO is going to do. I think we're like our expertise is more in the testing side of things and understanding, okay, what do the manufacturing partners really want? So OEKO really serves as this neutral third party in being able to do that. So I think there's enough people out there that are making products that we have plenty of good work ahead of us in terms of helping them make their product in a way that meets their company design philosophy, but also makes it in a more sustainable way or a safer way or any of those things. I think there's enough challenges in what we're doing. I don't want the challenges of having to source and maintain all of those.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes. The last thing we need is more people making more things. We have so many things out there. So if not making a specific kind of brand or something, what are some of the latest innovations or projects that OEKO TEX is working on, and what are your future goals with the organization?
So the standards themselves that exist today are always evolving. So the ones that are there have been, some of them, a standard 100 has been around for 30 plus years and it's changing every year because the way products are made is changing. The information we have around hazards and chemicals or use of chemicals is changing. So it's always adapting so that at any given day or any given production season, you somebody that's buying a product knows that, okay, they're getting a product that meets the strictest global standards. So those are always changing and evolving to meet the needs both of the industry and of the end consumer. But there certainly are some new certifications that have come out. And again, some of it ties back to the way that products are made. So we're doing a lot more certification now around chemicals and raw materials inputs that are going into it. So the idea being that if we can help companies use greener chemistry or make good product choices at the very beginning, then there's less and less need to retest a material over and over again. Because if we know that the chemicals that are going into a dye or some sort of finish that's going to give a textile a functional performance, if it's safe in the drum, it should be safe when it's applied on the textile and it should meet those requirements. So that can really speed up and help to adapt to the speed to market of these products, say, because that is one thing that continues to accelerate. The calendars for how products are made is shortening and shortening. And so doing testing at the end is more and more challenging for companies. We kind of alluded to it before as well, that sustainability means a lot of different things. So one of those things is it also means material choices and material traceability. So just last year, OEKO TEX introduced the organic cotton standard from OEKO TEX. And so that really brings in all of those attributes that have been existing for standard 100 for many years, and also helps to identify where was the cotton, what's the origin of the cotton, is it traceable and segregated from the field through the ginner, through the yarn spinner, all the way through, and particularly making sure that not only now are chemicals that were harmful or are harmful are excluded from the supply chain, but they're also excluded from the agriculture process as well. And but that also, for making that claim to the consumer, we know for sure that cotton made it from an organic farming practice to the finished products. That material traceability, I think, continues to be an area where there will be more future growth in terms of certification, because it's something that's very important to consumers. And then some other tools from OEKO TEX in terms of the ability of brands themselves to evaluate how are they doing from a responsible business practice as well. So those are I would say, the three main areas where we see innovation coming from OEKO TEX at the moment.
That's great. And so if a company wants to, again, get the OEKO TEX certification and they have pieces that are missing that are not the most sustainable or ethical, what would kind of be your guys' process in helping them. Do you guys help them along the way and be like, hey, maybe let's do this instead of that? Or do they have to go out and do it and then come back?
I mean, so as a more neutral third party where we're really assessing
Hmm.
the product, you have to be careful about how much consulting you're also providing to somebody. So we're not doing a lot of that side by side with it. There are some places, partly by helping them understand what are the requirements. Because one strategy would be saying, hey, we have this supplier or we have this partner that we're working with. We really like them for a lot of these different things. And so we want to keep working with them. So it's really about then capacity and capability building with that company. And so a company's making a decision about who's producing their product based on the quality of the product, where they are, how quickly they can deliver it, how reliable they are, certainly price. And so this ability to have a certification is a very important piece of it, but it's not the only piece. So we encourage people be thoughtful about how you're doing that. If you really want standard 100 certification, that's great. We really want you to have it. But is it better to go and find somebody that already has it and disrupt all of those other things in your supply chain that maybe affects your quality and your and how you deliver the product and ultimately is less sustainable, right? Because then the product doesn't last as long or whatever, versus taking that supplier and helping to educate them on what are the requirements and now they become certified as well. You don't have any disruption to your supply chain. Certainly some people, as they make this decision and they decide they want their products to have certifications, find companies in their supply chain that cannot or are not willing to change and meet those requirements. And so in those cases, there is a tool from OEKO TEX that's on the website. Consumers can look it up as well, and it's called the buying guide. And so from there, you can see companies that have certifications. So if I'm a brand, it helps me to look in different countries and find companies that already have certification rather than just starting from scratch.
Yeah, that's amazing. Before we wrap up, is there anything that I kind of haven't asked that you'd like to share?
Oh, I mean, in reality, it's a pretty quick, short time. There's a lot of information, but I think we've kind of covered all the way through from the beginning history of OEKO TEX to how it work and how do consumers find it. The biggest thing, I mean, we're here very close to the US market. And so it's been a really interesting transition, I would say, even from pre-COVID to now and people's shopping habits. And like you said, we're finding more and more of these labels in the market now. And like your experience where you didn't even realize it was there, but it was there, particularly in home textiles. There's a ton of those products available from almost every retailer in the US and particularly online as well. And so people are finding it. And I hear that all the time from people like,
Mhm.
I didn't know what OEKO TEX was. As soon as we talk to you, companies that we're helping them integrate it, and then in their personal life, they're saying, now everywhere I go, it's right there. So
Everywhere.
it's a pretty cool piece of it, I would say, for us to get to work with people that way.
That is great. And it's just great that we're seeing it more and that consumers are caring more about this. And also, the change is happening. It's there, even if you don't realize that it's happening. So, everyone go look around your house now and see if you can find some sort of OEKO-TEX certified thing. Thank you so much for speaking with me. Like you said, it was like super short amount of time, but so much good and valuable information packed into this little podcast here. Find OEKO-TEX on Instagram. It is OEKO_TEX. And while you're at it, you can follow me on my socials, my Instagram, YouTube, and everything else is at Lexi Silverstein, Lexy, silver like the color, Stein. And remember to make the ordinary extraordinary.